Hey, you guys, thank you for listening and following along with us here at Wellness Rebranded. We want you to know that this isn't just a podcast, it's a community and a movement. We are unlearning those toxic diet culture messaging, the unhelpful societal pressures, and we're relearning a different way of caring for our health and well-being. And we want to have a two-way communication with you. So we've just created a brand new Instagram page at Wellness Rebranded. We really want you to come follow along, connect with us, talk with us, download our self-care planner while you're there, get on our email list. We have so many fun and valuable things to share with you beyond just our podcast episodes. And this is how we're going to start connecting in a deeper, more meaningful way. So please come follow along. Welcome to Wellness Rebranded, the podcast where a dietitian, a personal trainer, and a mental health therapist get together to explore health and wellness from 3 different healing perspectives. I'm Elizabeth, registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor.
I'm Maria, licensed mental health therapist.
And I'm Tara, personal trainer. We believe in finding ways to nourish a healthy relationship with our mind and body, eating for well-being, not weight, finding joy in moving our bodies, and embracing and understanding our emotions. We are here to help you redesign your relationship with food, fitness, and yourself.
How great would it be if you got science-based guidance from qualified professionals instead of trying out conflicting, overhyped, and unproven trends?
If that sounds as awesome to you as it does to us, join us every week as we dig into strategies to enrich and enhance our day-to-day life and health.
And let's start rebranding your wellness journey.
Welcome back to another episode of Wellness Rebranded. I'm Tara, and I'm here with Elizabeth and Maria, and we are super stoked today because we have Ragen Chastain with us. So for those of you who are in the intuitive eating haze community, you know how exciting this is. And for those of you who don't, get excited because this is a huge deal for us. So Ragen Chastain is a speaker, writer, researcher, board-certified patient advocate, multi-certified health and fitness professional, and thought leader in weight science, weight stigma, and health. She is the author of the Weight and Healthcare newsletter, which is amazing, by the way, the blog Dances with Fat, and the book Fat, the Owner's Manual, editor of the Prager anthology, The Politics of Size, co-author of the Haze Health Sheets, and co-founder of the Fit Fatties Forum. Great name for that, by the way. In her free time, she is a national dance champion, triathlete, marathoner who holds the Guinness Book of World Records for heaviest woman to complete a marathon. She lives in Oregon with her fiance, Julianne, and their adorable foster dogs.
Welcome!
Hello.
Girl, you're so interesting.
Yay, thanks for having me.
This is great.
We're super stoked that you're here. So I have to ask, I had no idea that the Guinness World Record for heaviest woman to complete a marathon was even a thing. How did that come about?
So I had an injury and stopped being able to do all the things I actually like to do. I had a sort of a freak neck injury, and so the doctor said that I could do like walks. And I'm a fast twitch athlete all the way. I like to do something really hard for a short amount of time, and so it just wasn't my thing. So I knew if I didn't set a goal, I wouldn't do it. So I had about 20 weeks of recovery, and the Seattle Marathon, where my best friend lives, was 20 weeks away. So I decided to train and do my first marathon. And then I learned that I could have gotten a Guinness record. At the time, there was only one record, and the person who held it was a cis guy. And so they said, well, we could split it and have a male and female category. There's as yet, unfortunately, no trans and non-binary category for it. And so I thought, great, I'll send my finishing time. I'll get like a second medal. This is going to be fantastic. But there's a lot of requirements. And so I had to do a whole other marathon, having sworn it off after the first one in order to get the Guinness World Record. So that's how basically a lot of my work in fitness is I just want to try to create space with my own body for fat people. And so my goal in creating the record was for it to be broken early and often.
Love that.
To say like, no, this is a thing, and like people can do it if they want to. And if they don't want to, I fully support that, right? I've done both. I know that having a Netflix marathon and completing a marathon are morally equivalent activities. And like, if like me, you're slow enough there, they can take up a whole day. But I really think because I'm a fat fitness person, it's important that I be clear that like participating in fitness doesn't make anybody better than anybody else.
Yeah.
It's just nobody's obligated to participate, but everybody should be welcome. And so part of why I set the record was to say like, look, you could do this if it's something that appeals to you.
Love that.
Yeah.
I love that. It's like not a moral obligation to be fit.
Exactly.
So we were talking before you came on about how you got into this space. Like, how did you learn about weight neutral body affirming care?
So I actually, a little more than 20 years ago now, was looking for the best diet. I have been yo-yo dieting for years with programs recommended to me by doctors and dietitians. And my background is research methods and statistics. And so I decided that I would find the best intentional weight loss intervention through a literature review of all of the weight loss research. And I was, I wasn't in
No small
school.
feat.
That's like so awesome.
This is just like I didn't publish. I wasn't in school. I got no credit. I had a corporate job at the time. Like this is just the kind of nerd that I am in all
Yes.
aspects of my life, that this is how I solve problems. And so I did this huge literature review and I got to the end and I was so in denial and shock and anger at what I found that I actually did the entire literature review a second time.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And because what I found was that there wasn't a single study where more than a tiny fraction of people were actually succeeding at anything resembling significant long-term weight loss.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so that is what got me, because I was like, okay, as a fan of like math and logic, obviously weight loss is not the path to health that I thought it was. And so then I was like, how do we even get here? And so that sent me down a rabbit hole of figuring out because this is something that's considered a healthcare intervention that's prescribed to about 70% of the population that has the opposite of the intended effect the majority of the time,
Yeah.
Ah, that's like a
right?
terrifying statement.
Yeah. And like 95-ish% of people regain the weight, but up to 66% regain more than they lost. And there's nothing wrong with being fat or becoming fatter, but there's something seriously wrong with a healthcare intervention that's prescribed to that many people that has the opposite of the intended effect, particularly considering that it's been prescribed more and more since the 40s. And all we hear about is like, oh my gosh, people are becoming fatter. Why are they becoming fatter? Well, let's examine this situation. That's like giving everybody brown hair dye and then saying, why is everyone a brunette? Well, this is what we prescribe. So that was really frustrating to me. And that's kind of what sent me down the rabbit hole. And at the time, I didn't know that there was this incredible, thriving community that had been doing this work since long before I was born. Right. So I was just like in my own kind of lane of trying to figure this out and going through the research and stuff. But that's how I got into it initially.
Wow.
It's interesting that there's like this thriving community doing the work, but like nobody in the world knows about it. It's just now kind of starting to be like a mainstream conversation.
Well, I don't think that's accidental.
Yeah.
Right? The way that the weight loss industry, because they've known since the beginning, Weight Watchers' original charter was filed as a repeat business model. So they know that it's a two-part biological response. At the first part of an intentional weight loss attempt, the body loses weight while it's trying to figure out what's going on, but then it changes itself physiologically in response to the intentional weight loss attempt to become essentially a weight regaining, weight maintaining machine. And what the weight loss industry has done brilliantly is to take credit for the first part of the biological response and blame their clients and get us to blame ourselves and get everyone else to blame us for the second part of the same biological response. And so my area of expertise is the intersections of weight stigma, weight science, and healthcare. But I've developed a subspecialty in the ways that the weight loss industry has and continues to infiltrate and influence and manipulate the healthcare industry. And by doing that, and they've been doing this since, the 40s and even before, they have been able to shut out voices who have been saying, look, this doesn't work. The emperor has no clothes. Interestingly, now that they have these new weight loss drugs, and there's a lot to say about those, but all of a sudden, the people in the weight loss industry became like the last 50 people in the world to figure out that intentional behavior-based weight loss doesn't work. And now they're like screaming it from the rooftops, oh my gosh, like this doesn't work. Like, oh, thanks for coming along to what we've been saying since 1940. Way to
Welcome to
go.
the party.
Like,
It's so insane, right?
let's just ignore that you're decades late to the party and billions of dollars in profit late to the party and celebrate that you showed up at all, right? But only in the service of selling a more expensive, more dangerous weight loss intervention.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? They were not like, now would be a good time to examine these weight neutral options that people have been telling us about forever.
Right.
Right? They were like, oh no, what we need is something much more expensive and much more dangerous.
Yeah. Here's a so-called better solution that, oh, by the way, makes more money for us. So since I think you write so articulately on it, can you give our audience, like, what do you see as the maybe like the three biggest problems with a lot of the weight related research out there, or this weight loss research out, however you want to phrase it. But you articulate them so beautifully. I would love for you to share a little bit of that with our audience.
Sure. So the first problem is terrible research methodology. Research methodology that if you turned it in as a freshman in research methods class, they would have a talk with you about whether or not this was the right class for you to be in. And it's things like short-term studies. And so what they know is people lose weight in the first year and then they start to gain it back. And so a lot of studies will be 2 years long. And so people will be regaining their weight, but they won't have regained up to their original weight. So they'll stop at 2 years and say patients lost weight in the first year and regained it in the second year, but remained below their baseline weight. Now, a fun research fact, if a variable is going straight up, you're not supposed to stop observing it and assume that it leveled off that day. Like, again, you will fail freshman research methods if you try that, but it's incredibly common. Also, ignoring dropout rates. I've seen dropout rates in the like 64%
Wow.
That's
of subjects
crazy.
in a 16-week study dropped out by week 8. And the study concluded that the dieting was successful for everyone who complied.
Yeah.
And again, as a researcher, if 2/3 of your sample nopes out, you're responsible for caring about that,
Yeah.
right? There's probably
Right.
reasons that happened. And but what happens is a lot of this research is funded by the weight loss industry and or conducted by people who are taking payments from the weight loss industry. And so there's that piece of it. But I don't think it's just all people making bad research for money. There's also there's a great book. It's called Mistakes Were Made, But Not by Me.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about how when we have cognitive dissonance because our beliefs are challenged, we immediately respond, often subconsciously, with ways to justify, right? Confirmation bias and self-justification. And so I think people are bought into this paradigm. Some of them have based their careers on this paradigm. And so they're just boxed into it, right? And so it's not that they're saying, oh, I'm just going to create this crappy research. It's just that that's what's been done. That's what they keep doing. And if their research doesn't reach the conclusion that they want to, they assume the research was wrong rather than the conclusion. So that's like the first thing is research methodology. There's also two basic premise errors that this whole body of research is based on. The first is that, okay, well, if higher weight people are having a higher incidence of a health issue, then their weight must be the reason. And this is a correlation causation error. You learn this your first day of your first research methods class. Just because two things happen at the same time does not mean that one causes the other. And this is more complicated in healthcare research, in medical research, because we use correlation all the time, right? Often a causal mechanism can't be found. However, it's not responsible to do that without exploring what are called confounding variables, right? What else could be impacting this relationship that could cause this outcome? And in the case of higher weight people, there are three very well researched confounding variables, which are weight cycling or yo-yo dieting, experience of weight stigma, and healthcare inequalities, all of which are correlated with the same health issues to which being higher weight are correlated. And so these confounding variables are typically not even mentioned, let alone controlled for in studies that try to claim that being higher weight creates health issues.
The result of that is that many of the connections that are made between being at a higher weight and a certain disease, they're ignoring the fact that these things that you just mentioned, those three specific variables, weight stigma and the others, can also explain some of that, right? The very same things that get attributed to one could be explained by the other.
Exactly right. So for example, you'll hear people say, quote unquote, weight related health issues or quote unquote, obesity related health issues. These might actually be weight stigma related health issues, weight cycling related health issues. Bacon and Aframore found that all of the excess mortality that was associated with quote unquote obesity in both Framingham and the NHANES could actually have been caused by weight cycling. So it's a huge deal that this doesn't get controlled for, right? It would be like saying, oh, well, we know that cis male pattern baldness is incredibly highly correlated with cardiac incidence. So we have absolutely, obviously got to get these people to grow hair, right? It's the obvious difference between them, and that will bring down their rate of cardiac incidence. And that sounds ridiculous, and every audience laughs when I say it because it is ridiculous, but it is in many ways exactly what we do with weight. Obviously, because they're higher weight, and which brings us to the second of those basic premise errors, which is that if higher weight people experience a health issue more often, or if a health intervention doesn't work as well for them, the solution is to make them into thinner people.
Yeah.
right?
not
And that also, those
fair.
are two separate things, right? Even if higher weight people did have a higher incidence of a healthcare issue, the idea that making them thinner would prevent that or reduce that risk has to be separately proven and is not. Let alone the fact that, as we've just talked about, intentional weight loss has a massive failure rate. And the yo-yo dieting, the weight cycling that is the most common outcome, again, is associated with all of the health issues that get blamed on weight. So that's one other thing I point out is that because people will say, oh, well, yeah, intentional weight loss fails 95% of the time, but like so does quitting smoking. You just have to keep trying. And the difference is that a smoker is healthier for every cigarette they don't smoke. So if they quit for 2 weeks and then go back, they're healthier for not having smoked for 2 weeks. Intentional weight loss is not that way. It's not benign. People are not healthier for having attempted to lose weight. It's actually the opposite, right? They are at greater risk for health issues for having attempted to lose weight and having the intervention fail.
That is so interesting. My mind is just like racing with all these statistics and stuff right now. And it's like shocking to me that we've allowed the industry to get away with this for so long. Like
Yeah,
there has to be something we can do about this.
it's tough because of the ways that the weight loss industry has really insinuated itself into the healthcare industry. Like when they started it was just all about a stereotype of beauty that was based in thin, white, cishet, able-bodied youth, and in many ways still is. That was one thing. But now that they're calling themselves healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
and they've worked really hard. So when the World Health Organization declared, quote, obesity to be a disease, right, which is ridiculous. It's a body size, right? These words, quote, obese and quote, overweight, were literally made up, architected by the weight loss industry as a way to pathologize bodies based on shared size rather than shared symptomatology or cardiometabolic profile like you would see in an actual disease. And so when the World Health Organization declared, quote, obesity to be a disease, what a lot of people don't know is that they were approached by a group called the International, quote, Obesity Task Force, which was funded by drug companies, and asked to declare, quote, obesity to be a disease. And they said, we don't have the funding to deal with this. And so the IOTF paid for the entire meeting in Geneva. They drafted the declarations that came out of it. They bypassed the WHO's normal editorial process and sent it to hundreds of health ministers around the world.
What? I had no idea about
And then everything stemmed from that. So yeah, so the NIH was pressured to conform to the WHO standard, and it went on and on and on. But like the World Health Organization's declaration of this was literally underwritten and written by the weight loss industry.
Wow.
I knew that, and it's still shocking to
Yeah.
hear you talk about it.
I did not know that, or if
Me
I did,
neither.
it was like a long time ago I learned it, and I'm flabbergasted by that.
It's hard to talk about it for more than like 5 minutes without starting to sound like a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, because it is in many real ways a conspiracy. Like this was designed from the ground up to be incredibly profitable. And it goes back to what you said, like we've known this for so long. Why isn't the word getting out? And it's because they've been able to successfully brand anybody who is talking about them as crackpots. And it goes back to that, mistakes were made, but not by me. I've been giving presentations about this to healthcare practitioners, professionals since 2009. And I will give an hour, 2 hours, sometimes 4 hour lecture with, citing more than 100 studies. And somebody will shoot their hand up first thing in the Q&A and say, this is completely irresponsible. Everybody knows that being higher weight is unhealthy, and everybody knows that weight loss improves health. Right? Research-free answer. They're not critiquing my analysis. They've brought no research of their own. They really feel like a reasonable answer is to say everybody knows.
Mm.
And that is a problem. When something reaches everybody knows status, no amount of evidence can help.
Wow.
So how do you normally respond to that
Yeah.
statement? I'm curious.
So I'll say, yeah, this is a really common. Well, first of all, I always end my talks by talking about the story of Galileo.
Mhm.
And not just so he was, developed that telescope that found out that the earth revolved around the sun, and they made him recant and put him under house arrest and call him heretic. And that's terrible. But what's most interesting to me about that story is that his contemporaries are said to have refused to look through the telescope. So they weren't saying the telescope is poorly made. They weren't saying, hey, dude, your math is way off. They simply would not look.
What a great analogy.
And
That
so
is
I'll
a
say,
great
what I've tried to
analogy.
do is, yeah, John Robeson is actually, who's one of the people, he did a ton of work around early health at every size. and weight neutral health stuff. Incredible guy. He's got like a PhD and 3 masters, I think. He's the one who told me that bit of the story years ago. But yeah, and so when somebody brings that up, I say, I think this is an example of, maybe not wanting to look through the telescope.
Yeah.
And if I'm very happy, like I'm a scientist, I could have missed something, I could be wrong. So if you have evidence that refutes what I've said, I'm very open to talking about that. But just saying everybody knows isn't a scientific analysis, and it's not something that we can actually have a discussion about. It's more like a religious belief.
So true.
So that usually moves
Do you
stuff along.
find that when you're giving presentations to like medical professionals, are they receptive to this? Or is it usually like that's the response?
It's really, I've seen a lot of shifts. The shifts are too slow, but since 2009 to now, I've seen a lot of shifts. In the early years, the Q&As were straight up hostile,
Oh, wow.
right? People would walk out, they would get really mad. They would, they just be like, where'd you go to medical school? And my answer was, I didn't. If I went to medical school, I'd probably be making these exact same mistakes, right? I sought an education outside of that to be able to explore this evidence fully. But as time has gone on, people are more, and also in the early days, usually one person with power and authority made everyone else come. So we'd be like, we're serving breakfast. You can wear jeans, like whatever it took to like de-escalate the hostility in the room. But now my audience is people are choosing and asking for this information. I just spoke at a nursing conference where my talk was standing room only.
Wow.
Right.
It is encouraging.
And they were into it and they were asking questions. I was at Yale Medical School about a month ago now and talked to all of the residents in the internal medicine program, and they asked such excellent questions. They were familiar with the concepts. And so like the change is too slow and too painful, and there's hundreds of billions of dollars on the other side. So there's a good reason for that. But I really am seeing people starting to be willing to question these paradigms.
Well,
and
that's
that's really
encouraging.
encouraging to me.
Yeah, that gives me a lot of hope.
Me
So
too.
I'm curious what you think, because obviously there's so much conversation around these weight loss medications right now, Ozempic, Wegovy, and all the others. What do you think is missing from the conversation that you wish people knew?
Yeah, so much. First, I just want to like be clear about the drugs because there's a lot of like confusion about the names, which makes sense. So there's semaglutide. It's Novo Nordisk's drug. The type 2 diabetes application is Ozempic, and the weight loss application is Wegovy. Same drug, 2 different names. Then there's tirzepatide. That's Eli Lilly's drug. Mounjaro is the type 2 diabetes application, and Zepbound is the weight loss application. So at this point, there are other drugs, but those are the 2 major players, and there are more coming along. And so I think what I want people to first know is that these were not originally created as weight loss medications. They were originally type 2 diabetes medications, and they are solid type 2 diabetes medications. They work well for people who are contraindicated for other drugs. They work well for people who haven't been able to get the glycemic management they wanted from other drugs. They only start working when blood sugar rises, so there are fewer hypoglycemic episodes. These are solid type 2 diabetes drugs. They also happen to have a side effect of weight loss, a little bit of weight loss. And at the time that this was happening, for Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, they had made fortunes price gouging on insulin. And that money train was coming to an end, and they were being forced by Congress to start lowering those prices. And so they were both in search of a new blockbuster med. And so the question they asked was, could we take this small side effect of weight loss, and if we gave people a ton of these drugs, would they get more weight loss? So they essentially wanted to exploit the side effects. And Novo Nordisk's CEO said that they were, quote, taking a bet on obesity. So they were clear about it. And so they started testing at higher doses. And so what I want people to know is that the difference in the drugs is dosing and titration. When you dose it for type 2 diabetes, you're trying to get the smallest dose possible to get the glycemic management that you want while minimizing side effects. But for the weight loss applications, the goal is to maximize the side effect. And you can't do that without maximizing all of the dose-dependent side effects. And some of the side effects of these drugs can be fatal. And so one of the tropes that the weight loss industry is relying on is, we have years of research on these drugs as type 2 diabetes medications. And that's true. But Ozempic, for example, the first 4 years the maximum dose was 1 milligram. In the last 2 years, the maximum dose was 2 milligrams, but the dose for Wegovy for weight loss is 2.4 milligrams. So we don't have long-term research on these drugs at these doses.
Yeah.
And what we know from their own studies is that as soon as people stop taking the drug, they regain their weight, which is the story of every weight loss drug that has ever existed. But this time, they came back with a new marketing plan, which was to say, oh, well, quote, obesity is a chronic lifelong disease requiring lifelong treatment. So the idea is people will stay on these drugs for the rest of their lives. And we certainly don't have any research on the side effects of that, nor do we have research that shows that it will actually work. In the research that they have, where people were on the drugs for 2 years, which is the longest term we have, weight was starting to tick up again at 2 years, even for people who managed to stay on the drugs.
Yeah, I just learned that actually from reading your newsletter. I didn't know that that research was already existing, that to show that. And something that I worry about with the medications, and I always want to be clear that everyone has body autonomy, and like, we're not casting judgment on anyone who's choosing to take them in any way, but just trying to inform people different sides of the issue. But I worry about malnutrition and muscle wasting with it, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about that.
I want to repeat what you said. To me, I take a very firm view of body autonomy. I would never shame anybody for taking these drugs, even if whether it's for health or just trying to escape weight stigma. But I do think it's important that people get actual ethical informed consent. And what I'm hearing from patients is they're not getting that from doctors.
Mm-hmm.
Right. One of the things that these drugs do, they work by several mechanisms, but in terms of, originally they thought they were going to work in the gut. They're GLP-1 agonists, and in the case of tirzepatide, a co-GLP-1 GIP agonist. So one mimics one hormone and the other mimics two. And they thought they would work in that system in the gut, but what they learned is that, in fact, they're working deep inside the brain in ways that are not fully understood. And one of the researchers called it a happy accident that it worked, given that they were so wrong in their hypothesis of the mechanism by which they would work. But they slow gut motility and they disrupt hunger signals. So they do a lot of other things as well, but in terms of weight loss, that's a huge thing. Their side effects are gastrointestinal. In many ways, there's a lot of vomiting, a lot of diarrhea, a lot of belching, a lot of bloating. And so those are not things that are typically associated with enjoying eating food. And so that's another situation, like how much of this is just that we're slowing gut motility, where food is around longer. In the case of tirzepatide, it also decreases stomach acid. So you've got food in the gut longer, and you've got food that's not being digested as fast as it normally would. And then you've got this disrupted hunger signal situation. So yeah, malnutrition is a real question. And this is a constant issue with these weight loss treatments, is the assumption that higher weight people just don't need whatever food they were going to eat. Right? And it goes back to like the basic practice is to tell people to eat less and exercise more when you have no idea what they're eating or how much they exercise.
Right.
Yep.
And this is sort of like the drug form of that. And so we don't know. We're seeing now cases of ileus, which is when peristalsis ceases and the body can't eliminate solid waste. And that can be fatal, and has been. There's a woman in Australia who she qualified for the drug and she took it, and her goal was she wanted to wear a smaller size dress for her daughter's wedding, and she passed away. So she won't be attending the wedding at all. And doctors aren't talking about it. The other side effect that I think is not getting enough attention is that because it slows digestion, it can also impact the digestion of medications, like birth control, for example, or psychotropic drugs. And so there are people who are completely stable on their psych meds who are suddenly completely unstable and don't necessarily know why. I just had somebody contact me and ask, please write about this, because it happened to her where she became unstable. She didn't know why. Her doctor didn't know that this was a possible issue. It's certainly buried in there, but it says medications taken concomitantly, which usually means at the same time. But these are typically once weekly injections. And so it's not exactly concomitant. It's not like if you take the medication with the injection, you have a problem, but otherwise you're fine. That's not the situation. So it's a little misleading, I think, the language. But yeah, I think there's a lot that's not explored and a lot that's not being talked about. And I echo your concerns around malnutrition and around eating disorders, both the perpetuation of them, and then for people who have ED and are not being screened.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that
and
out.
are being given these medications.
Yeah, I can't believe I forgot to mention that concern, but I share that one too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a few clients at the gym who are taking drugs like this for various reasons, some for diabetes, some for fat loss, whatever. I don't judge, I just help them try to like, manage otherwise, but it is difficult to keep muscle on their bodies. Like when we are lifting, like pretty much across the board, they're all like maintaining or getting weaker, but everybody else seems to be maintaining or getting stronger, based on our exercise plan. So it's a little bit discouraging for me to see that they're losing some muscle when they go off of the drugs, as all of them have plans to do. They're going to have a slower metabolic rate, and it'll just make the problem worse than when they started.
And the weight regain is rapid with these drugs. People regain 2/3 of the weight that they lost and lost 2/3 of the cardiometabolic benefits they gained within a year of going off the drug. So it's pretty fast. And the whole, there's a whole cottage industry that's cropping up around these medications. And one of them is a company that's going to make smoothies for GLP-1 users to try to get more protein. And it always concerns me when we're making special foods to support these weight loss attempts. It becomes not just more and more embedded and more profitable for more and more people, but also more and more normalized. And you hear people, I also think the way that they've created this idea of food noise, right? And there are people who have pathological thoughts around food. That's absolutely a thing. But they've sort of just tried to rebrand normal hunger as food noise, relying on the fact that fat people have been told that whatever our thing with food is, it's wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So if we're hungry, it's wrong. And so I see people all the time say, oh, I never think about food and I don't want to eat. I finally have a normal relationship with food. And I'm like, that is not a normal relationship with food. You have been deeply misled.
Yeah, you're
right. And that scares me too. Sorry, go ahead.
No, once again, the weight loss industry co-opting our terms of food noise and other things.
Yeah. Food noise, in my understanding, and which is limited, I'm sure you can add much better context to this, but is often caused by restriction, right? That when you start these intentional weight loss programs, your body one of the changes it makes is to increase the hormone that makes you feel hungry and decrease the hormone that makes you feel full. And so it seems that often food noise could be cured by food.
Yeah, and when you're underfed, you are going to be thinking about food more often. It's your body's survival mechanism. And let's face it, a lot of people, when they're dieting or on these various weight loss attempts, they're underfed, and then therefore they are, not only actually hungrier, but more preoccupied in their brain with food. And I think you're right that now they've taken that and deemed it food noise and come up with this supposed benefit or of the medication. But there is another way to decrease food noise, and that is, one, to make sure that you're well nourished, and two, to get rid of the restriction and deprivation.
Ragen, do you think it's like scarier to so we have the semaglutide and the other drugs that are like, FDA approved and sold out of a pharmacy. What do you think about like the industry of smaller pharmacies, like compounding them themselves? Is that more dangerous, less dangerous? What are your thoughts on that?
It's much more dangerous. So compounding medicine is an incredibly important part of pharmacotherapy. It's typically, the idea of compounding is to create a small batch for a specific patient need. So like if a patient has trouble swallowing a pill, you could compound that medication into a liquid, even if it's not made as a liquid by the company, if it's not manufactured that way. Or you could do a capsule instead of a pill. Most PET medications, well, perhaps not most, but a lot of PET medications have to be compounded. They don't exist any other way. But what happens is if there's a shortage, then the FDA allows compounding pharmacies to create the meds that there's a shortage of. And there was a shortage of both Ozempic and Wegovy, of semaglutide. The problem is, first of all, the FDA is very clear that compounded medicines are not FDA approved. So you're trusting this pharmacy. Some of the pharmacies have been using semaglutide in its salt form, which is not the same thing as its base form, which is what is used to create Ozempic and Wegovy. There is not evidence on the salt form. It does not appear to be as safe or have the same efficacy rates. And so the FDA put out a statement about this saying, like, this should not be happening. They should not be compounding in salt forms. That's absolutely not something we recommend. But it's difficult with compounding pharmacies to necessarily know what you're getting. And even if it's in the base form, you've got the issue of, we're talking about a proprietary blend. And so there can be differences in the concentrations. It gets really complicated pretty fast.
Well, that's pretty scary too.
Super scary.
This whole conversation's been a little bit scary.
Yeah, I'm the good news fun guy.
Well, but no, I mean, I think more than scary is real. And how
Mhm.
many times we just don't have the information, or sometimes there's this belief that we've been carrying for so long that we don't want to look through the telescope because we just want this fast, supposedly unrealistic, fast solution without even taking into account the other variables to everything, which can be the damage this can cause as well. That's the scary part. But the information is real and is based on research. But do we want to hear it? That's the question. Are you open to hearing other things when it comes to your health? How wide and important is your health for you to look through the telescope on many areas of your life, but in this case, weight and health? That's the scary part, not the information.
Yeah.
That's really well said. It's interesting. I've been writing about this stuff and speaking, as I said, since 2009, and I've never faced the kind of defensiveness and hostility from people taking the drugs. I posted on Instagram, like, here's some quick things to know. And the misinformation that came flying in, I spent like the rest of that night just like trying to respond. And it was just blatant misinformation, right? And some of it, I think people were repeating what they had been told. But I'm like, no, like, look at the graph. The weight went down, then the weight went up. That's weight regain, right? It's right there. But what Novo Nordisk did for that graph, so the first study was 68 weeks, and then they looked beyond that. And so they compared at 1 year and 2 years and said, well, look, the weight is the same, it's maintained. But between 1 year and 2 years, the weight went down and came back up. So to compare 52 and 104 weeks, ignored the fact that it was going down at 52 and up at 104 weeks, right? And so people, but it like just the sheer defensiveness of it and how people are reframing accurate information as shaming. Right. I am very careful. I have no interest in whether an individual takes these drugs or not. Right. That is complete body autonomy to me. I am interested in people having access to correct information. So I never say anything like you shouldn't take these or shame on people who do, or like that's not my thing. But the way that people were like, this is shaming and I'm so sick of this kind of piling on. And it's like, nobody is shaming you. People are talking about accurate information about these medications. And so I think it's really interesting that Novo Nordisk, and they've done this very, very purposefully. They have their AstroTurf group, which is called the quote Obesity Action Coalition. And this is a group that is almost entirely funded by Novo Nordisk. They took $600,000 from them last year, and they lobby for Novo Nordisk, and they do patient interaction and patient media training for Novo Nordisk. And so this is this group's sort of reason for existing.
Wait, can I make
And so they create
Media training? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I gotta make sure I'm understanding this. You're saying that they're taking patients who are taking these medications and training them how to go out and do promotion for them?
Yeah, they media train them, and then they do hearings for they've got a piece of legislation right now where they're trying to force Medicare to pay for these drugs, which is ridiculous given that the primarily Medicare patients are over 65, and people over 65 were vastly underrepresented in the drug trials. But that's their big, like, golden goose, because as soon as Medicare covers it, then they can force private insurance to cover it. And so they've got legislation. So I'm in hearings all the time around various weight and health. I'm the legal fellow for the Campaign for Size Freedom right now through the Fat Legal Rights Advocacy and Education Project. And so Fat Legal Advocacy Rights and Education Project. And so these folks show up and they are media trained.
Does that happen with other medications?
And so they testify as, well, I'm a patient. I am not an expert in other medications. I would not be surprised if it happened, but the weight loss industry has made it an art. They also, when they launched Wegovy, they launched what they called their anti-weight stigma campaign, which is called It's Bigger Than Me. Get it? Because fat people are big.
Oh, that's so
like
crazy.
If your weight stigma campaign sounds like it was named by like a 6th grade bully, you're probably not an expert in this area. But their solution to weight stigma is insurance coverage for their drug,
Yeah.
right? And so they've
Crazy.
Yeah.
so they've like successfully in many ways co-opted decades of anti-weight stigma work to make it be about, well, we don't want to stigmatize fat people, but we absolutely want to eradicate them from the earth and prevent any more from ever existing. Behold, anti-weight stigma. And like that's not it, but they're paying researchers, they got researchers pumping out these articles that are using this as the idea of anti-weight stigma. It's really, really dangerous and really multi-leveled.
Oh man.
Thank you for doing the work that you do.
Oh my goodness,
Yes.
yes. Otherwise, we wouldn't know.
I
Yes,
learn a
we
ton
would.
from your newsletter every week, for
Well,
sure.
thank you.
It's so
Thanks.
important to get the information out there, and there aren't many people like you doing it. So you're just really filling such an important void.
And really the message here is for listeners in on this episode specifically is like we're not even asking that people believe everything that we say here, or we are just inviting people to do a little more research when it comes to make any decisions that have to do with your well-being. Because sometimes the effects can be, I mean, very important, cost benefit, right? Like really just do a little more research, because just because something is well known and everybody knows about it doesn't mean is the best way or the most beneficial way for your health, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. And I'm one of many people who are doing this work and do this work incredibly well. Mikey Mercedes, Deshaun Harrison come to mind immediately, and others. But yeah, I think one thing with these drugs, especially if your doctor brings them up, or if you bring them up to your doctor, I would ask about side effects. And if the doctor says all drugs have side effects, and that's their answer to you, that's a huge red flag for me. That is both true and absolutely useless in this context.
Mhm.
I'm not asking about all drugs. I'm asking about putting this particular drug in my body. What are the known side effects? What are the concerns about this? What are the limitations of what's known? Well, we've only got 2 years of research at this dose. So let's talk about that. And if your doctor isn't willing to engage in that, that to me is a red flag about your doctor, right? Or your healthcare provider, that they're not willing to be honest. And there's a paternalism that happens as part of medical weight stigma, where healthcare providers are like, look, I've got to get this person to lose weight. And so I've got to do whatever it takes, including perhaps giving them less information than I normally would, or like being aggressive to get them to do this thing that I know is best for them. Because as a fat person, obviously, we have tons of research that shows that they assume that fat people don't know basic health information, that fat people are less intelligent than their thinner patients. And so there's a paternalism, and it may be implicit. They may not even be aware that they have this bias, but it's a huge problem that we always kind of have to be on the lookout for, because to your point, we do need to be asking questions, right?
You
And
have note cards that you have for people to take to the doctor with them about weight stigma, right?
yeah, so I created them a long time ago, and you can still find them on Dances with Fat, and they've been translated into Spanish, German, and French.
Yeah, that's great.
So huge thanks to people who did that. And then I have on Weight and Healthcare some updated cards. But yeah, so there's one for like the patient to have the things to say, and there's another one to like give to the provider that explains the boundaries of weight neutral care. So that can be helpful for sure.
We'll link that in the show notes, because I think that's a great resource for some of our listeners to have.
Yeah, cool beans. Thank you.
Like, I consider myself fairly well informed on like weight stigma and health at any size and things like that. And I still struggle when I go to the doctor, because I know there's going to be weight stigma when I get there. Even though I
Yeah.
exercise regularly and I sleep and I eat a wide variety of foods and do all these health promoting behaviors, they can't see past the fact that, my gown is exposing everything.
It made me think of that quote. Have you guys ever heard that quote that doctors are those who prescribe medicines of which they know little, to cure diseases that maybe they know less, to human beings they know nothing about. Have you ever heard of that?
I
I
haven't.
haven't either, but I kind of like that quote.
I haven't, no. And I think it does. And I want to be clear, I don't think that this is entirely the fault of healthcare providers,
Of
right?
course.
It's a
Yeah.
systemic problem,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
they're
yeah.
put in a position where they've got very limited time and they're told to sort of Occam's razor it with fat patients, right? If you've got a fat patient, it doesn't matter what's wrong with them, get them to lose weight. And if any of those problems are still there, then you can treat them.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be wrong in any guise, but given the massive failure rate of intentional weight loss, it delays care sometimes forever. And then the impacts of that delayed care also get blamed on weight. Right. So it's a consistent problem. But yeah, I think that quote says a lot about what our current healthcare system creates for doctors and patients.
And the importance of advocating for yourself, because you do know your body way better than anybody else. You're with it 24/7. So when you feel those side effects,
Exactly.
you feel something might be wrong, please advocate for yourself. Just question some things, just bring some critical thinking, because it is your health at the end of the day. And we know how precious that is. But
Yeah. Yeah. And when you walk out of a provider's office, you're living in your body and they're on to the next person.
right.
So
Mhm.
no one is going to be as invested and have as much information about your body as you do. And so
Correct.
people shouldn't have to advocate for themselves. And when we face weight stigma, it becomes our problem, but it's important to remember it's not our fault.
Yeah.
But self-advocacy can make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love that
Yes.
quote. Seems like a perfect way to end it, actually.
Thank you so much. I'm sure our listeners are we ourselves are learning so much from you today that I'm sure our listeners are gonna learn from that. And like Elizabeth or Tara said, thank you so much for doing this work, because otherwise, what would we know? I mean, it was always have one side of the story. We need them all. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the work all of y'all do. It's an honor to get to support that work a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Same here.
So Ragen, where can our listeners connect with you before we sign off?
So weightandhealthcare.com is my Substack, and I publish a twice weekly newsletter about all of these things I write about endlessly. And then danceswithfat.org is my original blog, and I still have my monthly online workshops there. So you can catch the new workshop, catch any of the videos. And then for speaking, it's sized, SIZED, for success.com.
Okay.
Great.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I know that a lot of people are going to want to connect with you in all these ways.
Thanks so much. And again, thanks for the work you do. Thanks for the podcast. And thanks for letting me be a little bit of it today.
Thank you for listening. If you want to connect with me outside of this podcast, you can find me on Instagram at coaching_therapist.
I'm Elizabeth. You can find me at Elizabeth Harris Nutrition or in my Facebook group, Health and Healing with Intuitive Eating.
And I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Tara DeLeon Fitness. Guys, if you loved this episode or any of our other episodes, we would love it if you would leave us a review on Apple Podcast. It really, really helps us get the non-diet word out to the rest of the world. So please leave us a review.
Yes, thank you.